Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, the man charged with the power of judging the gods themselves, the supreme commander of God's Knights, former supposed hero of God Valley, Garling of the Figurland family. You know it's crazy, but this is our first sign of a division of power within the Celestial Dragons portion of the world government. You know, it's kind of a weird thing that Figurland Garling is your judge, jury, and executioner when the Gorosei are right there. But it appears as if the Gorosei concern themselves with pretty much everything other than the Celestial Dragons themselves. It appears to me as if Oda has essentially introduced here a faction, God's Knights, which is on the same level as the Gorosei. And so with this comes a tremendous amount of hype and expectation for Figurland Garling himself and the God Knights as a whole. The Revolutionary Army talks a bit about them after they've attacked Reverie, essentially saying that they think that they've just instigated the mobilization of God's Knights. They say this is where the real fight begins, which in my opinion is a seriously auspicious thing to say. From the Pacifista, the new Seraphim, which they have to know about through Vegapunk, you're talking about the Marines, and all of this seems to pale in comparison to the mobilization of God's Knights. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this though, or if I really buy into it all the way. And the Revolutionary Army has pretty much avoided conflict, like direct fighting, most of the time. So when the Revolutionary Army comments that the real fight starts now, well that's gotta be part of it, of like legitimately fighting. And Dragon has made it pretty clear to the Revolutionary Army, at least to Robin, right, what they're trying to fight against. And it's not against most of these factions that exist in the world, or in fact the world government itself. Their fight is against the Celestial Dragons. And I don't want to undermine necessarily God's Knights' strength, because I do think that they are incredibly strong. I think that they're the strongest Celestial Dragons, period. But the possibility exists that the reason why the fight starts now, and the reason why the God's Knights are put on a different pedestal as to like every other possible faction that the world government possesses, is the fact that the God's Knights are comprised of Celestial Dragons. Being that this is who the Revolutionary Army is actually trying to fight, it is a fight that they probably can't avoid. As a side note, I wonder if Oda was aware of the wordplay that exists within English here that I find to be fitting. It may not be, right? But God's Knights, like knights as in wear suits of armor, but knights, the night sky. God's Knight. If the Revolutionary Army is to hypothetically reach their own version of the dawn, you have to survive the night. But you know, I do find myself having somewhat mixed feelings. I'm curious as to what you guys think as well. But it's suggested that Shanks is a member of the Figurland family. I personally think that Garling is Shanks' father. Doesn't have to be true, could just be a relative, but that's what I think. At the same time, it seems as if God's Knights are playing out to be the direct enemies of the Revolutionary Army. You would expect the Revolutionary Army hype them up, then these are their opponents in some sort of final battle context. So who fights Garling? Is it Shanks or is it Dragon? Surely it can't be both, right? But I do want to just throw this out here. This is a thought that has occurred to me, but whether or not Shanks is a Figureland, like how do they know that? Shanks was found in a treasure chest, yes, but it seems oddly specific for them to know the exact family that he comes from. I would suppose that the best guess is it has something to do with Shanks' hair color. They call him red-haired Shanks. It's said in a way like it's not a very common descriptor. Like there's not a lot of characters in the One Piece world who have hair like Shanks, particularly those that were found in treasure chests at God Valley. But yeah, despite saying this, it still doesn't have to be true. So maybe Shanks as a Figureland is a literal red herring. And you better believe I feel good about that wordplay right there. Which would cut a lot of the weight out of any speculation that Shanks would need to or would eventually fight Garling. This definitely appeals to me somewhat because it's always felt like Shanks has got to fight Blackbeard. That's just, it's an unresolved conflict. You would expect Blackbeard in a final battle along with agents of the government or Celestial Dragons, God's Knights. So, you know, in the Revolutionary Army, Dragon, for instance, doesn't necessarily have someone that you would match them up with yet. So that could have been something that Oda wanted to accomplish there. But we're just speaking out loud. I think Garling is just a fascinating character right now. God Valley is something I want fleshed out. The battle there with Rocks and with Roger and Garp, you didn't hear about Garling before the recent chapter at all. despite him being the champion of God Valley. Like, what was the order of events here? Another possible speculation that some people might not like is we already know that the world government is very capable of manipulating events. And we already know that essentially everything involving God Valley has been manipulated. The battle itself is being erased. Roger's role in it, Garp is a hero because of it, but like, we don't talk about it. Rox no longer exists. So I truly wonder how true it is, anything that we learned about Garling associated with this event. Of course, some people will say, like, what's the point of all this if we're just gonna undermine Garling hype? You know, like, the whole point of this is to establish a very powerful enemy that some major character is going to have to defeat, and it's going to be an awesome battle. But my spidey senses are tingling a little bit when it comes to Garling as a character. Like, this is a somewhat convoluted topic to explain, but when somebody is a spoiled brat and overtly evil at the same time, they just get dunked on. I'm just saying that Oda's pretty consistent with his portrayal here. There's a certain character type, which a lot of celestial dragons would fit under, that Oda treats as a joke. And this goes along with Oda being more explicit about characters' backstories and the arcs in which they're relevant, like with Doflamingo. Doflamingo is an evil dude. Chaos incarnate, but you can see how he became that from his childhood. And ultimately, Doflamingo has a lot of insightful things to say based on his experience in life and the dual nature of his upbringing as a god and his fall. He sees the world from a different perspective and craves to regain what was lost. It's dynamics like this which make for a compelling villain, and when a villain is just a spoiled brat, Oda treats him that way. But this kind of story is incredibly hard to recreate with a celestial dragon type character who's never really experienced any hardship. Now, Oda can do this, and I don't want you to think that he can't, but it's definitely a task. You have to put forward some effort in order to validate somebody like Garling. Especially when you introduce him, and the most defining aspect of his character, the thing that you want to highlight when you first show this dude, is he says, stand up for subhuman scum, and you sink even lower. Like, literally, the number one character trait here is that he is a racist, with a god complex. And because he is a celestial dragon, you can't really defend it as related to his life experience in any way. It's a villain simply that makes me think that there's a possibility Garling gets Charlosed, because he's simply not a person to respect in any way, and that's how he will be treated narratively. So when I see a character like this, it makes me think of Wapple, Caesar, Spandam, Charlos, and maybe with a little bit of Hody Jones, which is probably not the characters that most people would really want to compare Garling to right now, but just based on his character, that's what I would do. But at the same time, Garling is so much different because we get an implication that he's actually a fighter, could potentially play an important role in battle, so I'm looking for a solution, in an attempt to try and understand him, as well as his future role in the story. The Hody Jones comparison is actually really interesting, and I would hazard a guess that Oda is going to utilize this. The whole thing with Hody Jones is that he was a racist, just the same as Garling appears to be. But humans had never done anything to Hody, just like I don't think that any fishman or any other race has done anything to Garling. Unjustified hatred. We talked a lot about parallels within the story in all sorts of different ways, and this is definitely, to me, a potential big one. Honestly, I find it to be beautiful and very fitting with things that Oda's already done. Go back to Arlong Park, right? The whole thing was how fishmen have mistreated Nami's village, and how they deem themselves superior to humans, which ultimately is the justification for all the atrocities. But Oda folds it upon itself when we visit Fishman Island and you realize all the history there. Arlong had literally recreated Sabaody Park, and he called it Arlong Park. During Sabaody, we learned that Kami actually dreamed of being able to go to Sabaody Park. That was like a goal of hers. A wonderland that was never safe for her to visit because fishmen there get captured and sold into slavery, which in fact happened. And likewise with Arlong Park, the humans there are essentially slaves, as Arlong becomes the thing which his people were fighting against. He essentially acts as a celestial dragon. It's definitely not a coincidence that Arlong demands a tribute or a tax from his people in the same way that we see the heavenly tax from the celestial dragons. Arlong is basically Garling. but seen from the other side of the glass. Also a really interesting parallel with how Arlong associates with the corrupt Marines, and the government associates themselves with corrupt pirates in the underworld, utilizing their quote-unquote enemies to perpetuate their rule. Another incredibly intelligent inversion. Nami and the people of her village don't understand why Arlong is doing the things that he's doing. It's not fair, right? And the same mentality exists within Arlong and the other fishermen. It's all part of a never-ending cycle of violence. Another really cool Easter egg here is we see a completion of Mosgard's story. Like, he was involved in the Fishman Island flashback that we saw. And that story's conclusion seems to be here with Garling. Another example of the government burying the truth. So likewise, I find it fitting for Oda to parallel Hody Jones. Hody Jones exists as this character whose rage is not justified, so maybe there is a human counterpart. And all of this dovetails beautifully into my general speculation that Lunarians being former gods is going to become important. And I believe that the era was defined by a race's individual strength, where the Lunarians were literally the strongest. Societal classism all revolved around this point, which put fishmen actually fairly high in the pecking order, potentially like just below the Lunarians, and therefore above humans. So there was in fact a period of time in which the humans were enslaved and oppressed by fishmen, thus creating your human counterpart to Hody Jones, Figurland Garling. It makes a lot of sense to me, and while we're here, we see Garling's hairstyle, and it's in the shape of the crescent moon, and we've gotten a lot of this with the celestial dragons recently. All of the Gorosei have names related to planets. And of course, these people refer to themselves as celestial dragons, so of space. And they practically wear spacesuits. So I'm not entirely clear about the timeline here, but it has always made sense to me that perhaps humans, or certain humans, originally came from the moons that surround One Piece. And just a simple logic that I like so much is, look, there's less gravity on the moon, therefore those that live there would be inherently weaker. Now some might say, well, there's humans like Zoro and like Luffy, they're so strong, so this doesn't really check out, but, we're getting into theory land here, but think about Sanji. Sanji as a modified human. Ask yourself, what if Sanji had children? Right now, had children, right? Those children would likely share his modified genetics given to him by science. We know that the past was more advanced than the present. Everything that Vegapunk is creating and everyone associated with Vegapunk is creating is based on technology that existed in the past. So I'd wager some money there was genetic enhancements, just like Sanji, that existed during the Void Century. Meaning your Zoros and your Luffy could literally be monsters. It's referred to time and again like they're not really human, are they? Because maybe they're not. Descendants of the Void Century's version of the Seraphim. Note today that when you have the Seraphim, they have really interesting names like S-Snake and S-Bear, all names relating to animals. And we have a good old Monkey D. I'm just saying, you guys want wild thoughts and I'm here to provide them to you. But I want to conclude this video about Garling because I have one major speculation about him. And it all relates around the defining character trait that we have for him, is that he is a racist and that his story might have similarities to Hody Jones. In my opinion, Oda is very careful about where he spends time. He's careful about not only the panels that he selects, but what is included in them. And so for him to essentially start off out the gate, trying to encapsulate Garling's character in this way, suggests to me that Garling has a big role to play in regards to the non-human races of the world. And this is usually highlighted by the fishmen. They represent this conflict within the story, although it applies to every race. We have been wondering for ages what will happen to Shirahoshi. And we know for a fact that Imu is aware of Shirahoshi's existence and likely what her powers are as the ancient weapon Poseidon. Shirahoshi has to be brought into the story, and somebody is going to do that. I believe that Imu is eventually going to attempt to acquire the ancient weapon Poseidon, Shirahoshi, and Imu will send Garling. Because right now, there is no better character for Imu to task this with. Nobody has more stake in this conflict. I'm definitely still curious what role Caribou has to play, and I'm not saying that the story ends here. But if we're looking for an inciting event, something that is going to make Shirahoshi relevant, I think that it begins with Imu and with Garling. And let's just be honest, man, there's no better way of amplifying our feelings about Garling than to send him to Fishman Island with his racism and his cruelty. That's how you create a character that we are ready to see get punched in the mouth. And I've always believed that Arlong Park kind of encapsulates where the story of Fishman Island and the fishermen is going. The villagers stomach Arlong's oppression for an absurd amount of time. But once Arlong betrays Nami, it reaches a point to where they can't forgive and forget any longer. They can no longer simply wait for him to leave. They know that they can't defeat Arlong, but they choose to confront him anyway because death is preferred. And I kind of get the feeling that Shirahoshi is going to play a similar role as Nami, the straw that broke the camel's back. And as we have already speculated, Arlong represents the Celestial Dragons. But yeah, guys, I just wanted to make a video discussing my thoughts on Garling. This is pretty much what I have right now. I try to include everything in here, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. But it's obvious, right? We're heading to the end game, so the board is being set up. So if this is true or not, I figure we'll find out pretty soon. But as always, curious as to what you guys think. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comment section below. Remember to check out my book, The Booms, Volume 1 and 2 is out. Links in the description as well as pinned in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.